The ball. Deana found herself spending more time with Umiko and Jackstein, especially after they all moved to the Fungi Lodge together. Deana's door was gone, the frame of her new room replaced with a silk cloth. Still, the room didn't have that strong smell, and it was more comfortable with a double-layer mat and smooth walls. Jackstein's time alternated between the two of them to seed their eggs. She often went to the nesting grounds with Umiko, their orgasmic songs blending together as the abundance of eggs filled the slides, rolling down to the center. They trusted each other with the amounts of their wealth. During some of their meetings, Jackstein would explain the necessary quantities of food and turpid cups to avoid waste. He also detailed how much they should spend on their gowns and his suit for the ball. She never thought she'd see the day she'd be shopping for a ball gown, let alone with someone who genuinely wanted her to look her best. Umiko picked out a cream dress with orange ribbons. Orange wasn't Deana's favorite color, but when she put it on, she couldn't help but notice the gazes of the other females. It was distinctly flattering to her curves and the dark shade of her green skin. In turn, Deana looked for a dress for Umiko, seeing so many that would fit her small frame, but none seemed to stand out, until she spotted a dark dress with purple trimmings. Umiko immediately grabbed it and put it on. The dress seemed to be made specifically for her. They bought their gowns. Finally, as the sun touched the horizon, lines of Mycorians who had made it to the ball stood ready to board the horizontal trains. The carts, chained together and sitting on wheels, had poles extending to each side, clasping long cords. At the announcement of flutes playing, the Mycorians pulled the cords, and the train slowly made its way across the Great Mushroom. Approximately 200 to 300 Mycorians rode this train each year, those who had reached their mating life stage and obtained the proper amount of wealth. Deana never thought about how low that percentage was, compared to the thousands who hatched annually. No one really focused on the numbers. Everyone simply hoped and worked to attend. But she thought about numbers a lot once she had won her wealth from the factory. She'd mentioned it to Umiko once, who firmly stated she didn't want to think or talk much about the factory, especially since they couldn't recall what had happened anyway. "Let's live in the now," she had said. Deana looked at Umiko now, who sat across from her in the cart, waving at the many Mycorians who congratulated them, some running frantically alongside, waving back. "We've made it," a female from her cart said. "We've made it." Deana looked away. Jackstein rode in the mail carts, somewhere in front of them, but she couldn't see him. As her thoughts drifted to time spent with him, Umiko suddenly grabbed Deana's hand and forced it to wave. She grinned as she reluctantly began to wave to the crowd. The large archway, swirling with flowers, loomed over the train, signaling the stop and entrance to the ball. They unloaded, approaching the arch and hearing the orchestra's song carried on the air. Females squealed their delight, and males smiled at each other. The music was beautiful, and the ground a soft moss. All were barefoot for the dance, and would remain so in the soft towns and cities on this part of the Great Mushroom, a true sign of status. There would be no work there, only the rearing of children, loving spouses, and taking up a hobby or two. Everyone else on the Great Mushroom, alongside the Semnai, would provide them with extra food and home maintenance. Umiko took Deana's hand as they passed through the archway into the decorated outdoor ballroom. Pillars overflowed with flowers, and linen-covered tables piled high with fruit, with waiting chairs. The 3 moons hung above with stars, making the entire scene feel magical. Deana scanned the ballroom, feeling Umiko's hand slip from hers, as her friend gracefully moved to the dance floor. Deana navigated around a few other guests, trying to see who had so immediately captivated Umiko. It was clear Umiko was drawn to dance with her husband. When Deana finally saw Umiko, She immediately saw the male who took her in his arms. Jack's teen. His eyes were only on hers, and hers on him, as they swayed, then twirled apart only to drop back together, dancing across the floor. Dicena's heart sank. Why didn't she keep her vow to herself and avoid making promises? Of course this would happen. She'd always known it would. Still, she shouldn't feel too disappointed, since she would also feel and dance with a husband this day. She had hours to find him within this crowd, and if she didn't find one, she would be chosen by a couple in the town or city to be a second, third, or fourth wife. For she would definitely blush for a couple who had solidified their connection and been together for a year or more. That was the only way additional spouses worked. So she was guaranteed to be married. It wasn't the end of the world. Yet she couldn't take her eyes off them. They danced as if they were destined to be together by the signs from the stars. It was obvious when the song slowly came to an end, the blush of marriage subtly emerging on their skin. They continued to gaze at each other, oblivious to everyone around them and the mark upon their skin. They only snapped out of their trance when several Mycorians began clapping. A dozen couples had matched and married during that first dance, a sign of the highest prosperity for the rest of their lives. Umiko and Jackstein were shocked as they looked at the blush marks on each other. Then they laughed and hugged. Dicena softly clapped for them, tears brimming her eyes. She thought of turning her back and searching the crowd for her own marriage dance, when Jackstein caught her eye and began walking toward her. Dicena quickly considered what she should say. "Congratulations! You both deserve it." Unfortunately, a tear traced down her cheek, and she furiously wiped at it. "I'm so happy for you both." He stood close to her, more so than he should. "You promised me a dance." It was absurd to dance with him now. He was married. It would look inappropriate for a newly blushed Mycorian to dance with an unblushed one. He should be enthralled with his wife and want to spend every hour with her at the ball, creating cherished memories. He said, "You promised me." How could she possibly turn him away without her mind spiraling into darkness? She had wanted him. Jackstein had been wonderful to her. Could she say the same for her unknown husband? She tried to reason with him. Jackstein, that was before... She looked at the blush that had darkened now upon his shoulders. Ignoring her, he grasped her hand and led her to the dance floor. She tried pulling away, but not so forcefully as to draw unwanted attention to her struggle. She didn't want any negative comments to appear against Jackstein. He was a wonderful male, a male who tightened his grip on her hand, while pulling her reluctantly deeper onto the dance floor. They passed by Umiko, who only sucked in her lips with a smile and walked to the edge of the floor. She was okay with this? Why? They both shared him, of course, both enjoying being his lover and breeding Semnai together. But that was during that lifespan, and this was now a new lifespan. They all could only be friends. Jackstein stopped, yanked Dicena to him, and placed his arms around her waist. He swayed as the new song began, forcing her to sway with him. She glanced around, embarrassed, and muttered to him angrily, "This is absurd." She tried not to be obvious as she looked to see who was watching them. He responded by squeezing her tighter against him, which sent chills through her as she felt his familiar kiss on top of her head. He allowed her to pull back a little, only to make her look into his eyes. They were so intense, so hungry. They hadn't changed from the times they bred together. She remembered how he made her holler, his whisper in her ear to keep going, and his eagerness to seed into her more. He was a ferocious lover. I was never like this before the factory," he had shared with her. I could barely stay erect for a few minutes before losing it again. I became in debt to the Leaf Lodging. Deana had nodded, understanding. I suppose that's why you wanted to stop living there? He nodded. And for financial reasons. He had scratched his thigh. Can we go again? He didn't always need to ask for more, but he kept her nub sensitive as he continued rubbing it while they spoke. She nodded her acknowledgement anyway, which would always give him a beaming smile, before he laid her down and inserted himself again. During this dance, it was nice to see the hunger in his eyes still there. Just one more time before she would never see it again. She stared into those eyes, knowing her heart filled with his presence every second she continued to do so. She would only be hurting herself by continuing on this way. But just for this moment, just for this one dance, she wanted to pretend that she was his. He twirled her around, his eyes catching hers again, and his wonderful arms wrapped obsessively around her waist. A smile escaped her lips, as did another tear, which he wiped away this time, only to have to wipe another on the opposite cheek. The song continued, and they continued. Her heart so warmed and hot in his embrace that she didn't even hear the song end. You're mine, he said, his fingers tracing along her collarbone. I've always known. You both were mine. Deana was bewildered for a moment, touching her collarbone. Did she have... He pulled her to him and planted a firm kiss on her lips. She was still shocked, feeling her collarbone when he released her, only to feel shoved as Umiko grasped her in a hug, laughing and screaming in hysterical excitement. Umiko had no words, but sputtering giggles and screams as she pulled away and then grabbed Deana again in hugs over and over. Jextine stood by, smiling down at the both of them. Deana remained shocked as she heard the thunderous clapping and saw amazement on everyone's faces. The crowd had witnessed and participated in a remarkable and unique event. One Mycorian taking 2 spouses at the ball. The musicians began again, and Jextine held both of their hands, swirling them around and dancing. He alternated dancing chest to chest with one, while the other danced holding him around the waist and resting their head on his back. It was a dream, one that stopped her tears and replaced them with smiles that hurt her cheeks. This was more than she had ever wanted. This was better than her dreams. She had a sister wife who was a friend first, and a husband who loved them equally. They were wealthy beyond means with what they had won from the factory, and a year from now, they could both be pregnant with children they would keep in their homes. They danced and danced until their legs began to ache. Jextine found a table, and they ate from the piles of fruit on top of it, their legs touching. They spoke of the things Deana had forced herself not to talk about aloud before. They discussed how they wanted their house to be, the shopping they would do together, and budgeting for Jextine's sake. They laughed and agreed, with a few disagreements, which made Deana remember that a dream wasn't perfect without a little discord. Nonetheless, it was still a dream. And this one had come true. The end.
Congratulations! This is Deana Zhollis. You have reached the ultimate ending. Cheers to you for completing this journey, and I encourage you to bring your own dreams to life after many and many struggles. Thank you for dreaming with me.
Curious about another path? Why the heck not? Or, this is my preferred ending.